Great, thank you. Yeah, just let's wait for a couple of more minutes. Maybe someone will join in, and if not, that's also fine. Cool. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so if you want to check it out, it's bricks.kern.ai. Maybe I can make it a little larger, but I don't think it will enlarge the bar on top. Okay. All right. Should I start then?
Yeah, I think we can start now.
Okay, then let's go get going. A warm welcome from my side as well. Yeah, I'm Leonard, and very happy to have you all here. Also, welcome to people who are watching online. So today I'm going to show you our really cool open source tool, which is called Bricks. It's an open source content library for natural language processing. And in Bricks, you can find a lot of really useful modular components to transform or to enrich or to and extract data from your texts. First of all, a short question. Who of you has some level of expertise in natural language processing? Any of you? Okay. Some, okay, that's right. That's totally fine. I'm going to keep this talk relatively basic, so if you don't have any domain knowledge in NLP or just very little, that's totally fine. You should probably be able to tag along just fine. So let me maybe start with a short outline of today's session, what we're going to look at today. We just did the introduction part, very nice. Next, I'm going to show you around in our open source tool, going to show you what you can do and what the cool features of our tool are. After that, I'm going to tell you how our modular components, which we call Brick, how they are structured and why they are structured in the way that they are, and how we basically build all of these modular components. Then, after that, we're going to head over to our GitHub page where you can find all the source code for our tool and where you can also find a whole lot of ideas for new components, or you can find pages for the modular components that have already been integrated in the past, and we're going to pick a cool use case that we can then later on integrate together. So we're going to build a new Brick module together today as well. All right, after that, we're going to do we're going to check out some prerequisites, what you need if you want to contribute, if you want to build such a module yourself. It's very easy, it's very simple. We're then going to do some standard development things like setting up a virtual environment and installing requirements, all that's kind of thing. After that, we're going to write some code, going to test out some ideas, and then we're going to embed a Brick module into an endpoint service. What that is all about, I'm going to show you later on, but it's a very important feature of a Brick module. Then we're going to add a code snippet that users can then copy from Bricks and then embed into their own projects, so another very important step. And as with any software, we also need to write some documentation then as well and set some configuration so that everything's working fine. And after that, of course, some further testing to ensure that everything works well and that everything is set up as intended. Then we're going to create a pull request and hopefully at the end have a new working component for our open source content library and yeah, have great success. Cool. Before we jump into some code, allow me to show you some of our brick modules. So our content library is divided into 3 larger sections. The first one being classifiers. So the name here is very self-explanatory, I would say. So whenever you have some text input where you, for example, want to get the sentiment from, or you want to find out if the text contains any profanity, if you want to find out how subjective it is, then you can use these components to classify your text. So for example, here we have a specific sentiment classifier, and on the upper right of each brick component, you have a small window. If I maybe enlarge it, we can see it a little better. And here, this is really your playground to test all of these models out and to see if it's the right one for you. Here, for example, we have an example input saying World Peace announced by the United Nations. That is very obviously very positive. So if we run that brick module, it says, okay, yeah, it's positive. But sometimes you maybe have cases where it's not that obvious and you want to try out if the module is working as you think it does, then you can try it out here. So I can put something else in here, like PyCon is really cool with lots of nice people. Can try that out as well, and it's obviously, again, a positive sentiment again. But I can also try it out with a negative sentence, like the coffee was really bad, and it started to rain. Oh no. And let's see what the sentiment classifier thinks about this. And I would say it's negative. Yeah, I agree. So let's say you scrape some data from Twitter, social media. You have a question right there?
Your previous sentence, if you just changed nice to nasty, what would the sentiment be? Just because you said that the conference was interesting, but the people were nasty.
Yeah, let's find it out. I would guess it would then return a neutral sentiment, but let's find out. So what was the sentence? PyCon is really great, but the people are nasty. Those are not my words, by the way. I don't agree. This is just for testing purposes. Then it would say, yeah, it's negative. So that's overweighing. Again, this is just one of the sentiment classifiers that you can use. And if you say, okay, this one is not accurate enough for me, then yeah, you can try out another one. But you don't have to integrate anything into your environment or something. You can test it out right here. But if you say, okay, this module looks really cool, I want to use it, then you have the source code available right here. You can just copy-paste the snippet. We also always provide an example implementation so that you get some examples to try it out on. And yeah, you can basically just copy-paste this and run it and see how it works as well, and directly integrate it then into your project. Yes, of course.
This is relying on
Vader, yes. So Vader, this is not like only for Star Wars content or something, but no, Vader is like the name of the algorithm that we use in this specific brick module. So Vader stands for, it's right here, it stands for a valence-aware dictionary sentiment reasoner. So it's a rule-based system that's basically looking at all the words in the text and then determining the sentiment of that text. But we also have other components that work a little differently. Yes, please.
One question to that, just looking at single words or also the context around the words?
I'm not entirely sure how it does it, but I would guess, yeah, that it's like counting all the words in a text corpus and then also tries to do some context-based matching. But it's not as good like a GPT model or something. Like if you need a really robust model, then this is not the way to go. But it's very lightweight, and for a lot of use cases, it's really good. So yeah. And I think sentiment classification is also like a tangible use case that's kind of easy to understand. Okay, but we don't only have brick modules for classification, we also have things to do extraction. So whenever you want to retrieve certain entities from a text data, like, for example, addresses, codes, certain numbers, credit card numbers, dates, you can use the brick modules for that as well. So for example, I have here a module for date extraction, and I have a text with a lot of different dates, and if I run it, the extraction modules will then return the position in which it found the entities, so that I can then later work with it. We do it in that way because we use a lot of spaCy for our work in NLP. So if you don't know spaCy, it's a very popular library for natural language processing. And if we have the position of the extracted values, we can then use these to then further down the road process them with the spaCy library. Okay. And last but not least, if you're not doing any classification, if you don't doing any extraction work, you're probably dealing with a generator. So with the generators, you can do cool things like, for example, language translation. Basically, whenever you have some form of input and the input is changed and you have a different output, like language translation, you can do search with Google or Bing using these modules. You can clean your text data. So if you have a lot of HTML fragments in your data, then you can use some of these modules as well. And yeah, that's basically the generators in a nutshell. All right, very cool. So any questions so far, or should I move on? Okay.
So just if anyone is tweeting, use hashtag
Yes, right.
on the target of it.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, maybe let me get back to the Vader sentiment classifier. So the difference between just a simple code snippet and like a brick module, as we call it, is not only that we have this playground, but we have like the whole open source, let's say, platform behind it. So when I click on the GitHub button that every brick module has, it will take me to the dedicated issue page on GitHub that every of our components has. Basically, the process is that if you have any idea for a new module, for a new brick component, you write down your idea and say, okay, I want to do this, I want to do that. Maybe you already have a draft or first version of the code that you would like to share, where you say, okay, I can do this with this code. You don't have to provide any code, but you can always, of course, share it here as well. And you can also provide some additional context here. For example, share a certain Python library that you found or an article. It could be anything that could be used to then build this component then. And the great thing about the GitHub pages here is that you can also use them to ask questions. For example, here my colleague Johannes, he was not really sure about how to use this sentiment classifier. He was not really sure how it's working, and he just could use GitHub then to ask a question. You can also use the page here to say, okay, it contains a bug, or it can be improved by doing something, and then you have this platform to talk about. Okay, before we jump into all the ideas that are currently open, maybe let me tell you how all of these models, all of the modules are currently structured. So to build a brick module, we need at least 4 files here. First, we need a file called init.py, and this is basically containing all the code that you see that is run when we run the example input. So this is not computed locally or something. This is like running on an endpoint service that we provide. And all of this code is then contained in the init.py file. Then we also need a file for the code snippet that you then have here. Oops, where's my mouse? That you see here. And the code in the code snippet that the user then sees is a little bit different than the code for the actual endpoint that you can then run. And so these need to be in different files. And also we store the code snippet in a markdown file. We don't want it to be executable, so that's fine. And it's also way easier for us to parse and then put in our content management system. Otherwise, this would be just a normal Python file or something. Then we also have a config file, nothing wild going on here either, just to, for example, set the links for the GitHub pages or the or like hashtags. We have that. We also recently included a badge if a brick module is GDPR compliant or not. Not really that important for, say, private users. But if you are a company, then this might be really good information to have if a module is using some sort of API, for example, and you don't know really where the data is going, then you maybe shouldn't use that component then. And last but not least, some documentation in the README file, which ends up here at the top, where you basically can say how to use this module, if there's anything special you need to keep in mind when using it, some sources, what library was used, these things. Cool, and optionally, we also provide always a second code snippet, which is based on Spacy for all the modules. We do this because we use Spacy a lot, so the library for NLP I mentioned earlier. We use that in our tools and our other tools a lot, and so to ensure that you can use all the brick modules in our other tools, we provide that as well. But I'm going to skip that for today. You don't really need to work on that. It's totally optional. If you like to include that, then feel free to do so, but you totally don't have to.
May I ask something?
Yes, of course, always.
So, point 2 and point 1 contain the same code?
Roughly, yes. So the actual code that is run on the text data is the same, but everything around that is a little bit different. I'll talk more about this later on, but it's similar.
Okay, and since you might not mention that again, in the optional part, when you say like, we put there an extra thing in order for the brick to work with Spacy, like what is this extra thing that you need?
Yes, so all the brick modules, they take in a normal string as an input, and that is not the case for the code that we use with Spacy. So all the Spacy code snippet, they expect a Spacy document as an input. Basically, that's already a little bit pre-processed, and we do that so we can later down the road do a little bit of more processing. But yeah, the only difference is really the input that the function is then expecting. And yeah, to avoid that, you always need to create the Spacy input yourself. We also provide like a regular Python input, if that's a little bit clearer now. Okay, cool. Then we have that. What are the prerequisites if you would like to build one of these models on your own? It's very easy. You only need Python. I mean, we're at PyCon, what a surprise. You need Git and GitHub, of course, to be able to create an issue for all the modules. You need our GitHub repository, which you can simply clone. In the future, we might include a pip command as well, so that you can just pip install bricks, but we haven't done that so far. And of course, I think it's always important to have fun when working on things like open source, because otherwise, what's the point? So yeah, not really a prerequisite, but I highly recommend it. Okay, then I'm going to jump right back into GitHub, where we have an issue page. If you would like to check out our GitHub page, it's github.com/code-kern-ai/bricks. And here you can find all the source code for all these components as well. So if you would like to use them in your own projects, you have that accessible here. And you can also check the issue page where we have some ideas open for brick modules that haven't been implemented yet. So for example, one of our community members, he said, okay, I want to build a brick module that is able to detect what frameworks are mentioned in a text, for example. Or my colleague Johannes, he suggested to build a brick module for OCR autocorrection, so really cool things. And I recently stumbled upon a very cool library which is called Sumi or Sami, which you can use to, well, summarize texts, and works really, really well. And it's also very easy to use, so I think I'm going to use that one to then build a brick module. Also have provided some of the code here as well, and so we can take that and then build a brick out of that. Spoiler alert, it's not going to be as good as, like, again, a GPT model, but it's, again, very lightweight, very easy solution, and it's also free. So I think it's worth building a module out of that. And the special thing also is that I want to use this library to summarize websites. So I don't want to have a whole text as an input, but I want to first scrape some data, for example, from a blog article or from Wikipedia, to then get a summary of a website. And to do that, I'm going to use the Wikipedia page for capybaras. If you don't know capybaras, very cute animals, really, really like them. And I think I'm not the only one who likes capybaras, because the text for them is really long, so people seem to really like them. But maybe I don't have the time to read all of that. Then I might be using the module. Okay, going to refill my glass of water, and then we can jump into some code. Okay. Are there any questions already, or maybe online?
So you can also use Slido to post the questions.
Perfect.
I think there are some old questions on Slido.
Old
questions, like from the session before.
Oh, from the session before. Okay, no, I can't answer those. I can try, but
Yeah, we'll archive them. I think someone should be. Yeah. So.
Okay, so if you like, you can tag along, but of course you don't have to. To develop, I'm not going to use Windows. I'm going to use what's called a Windows subsystem for Linux. So basically I have a Linux kernel running inside of my Windows OS. And so I'm going to use that to actually build the module. So first what you would do then, of course, is go to our really cool GitHub page and then clone the repository. So you would do like git clone and do that. I already have the repository on my machine, so I'm not going to execute that. Instead, I'm going to head over to the repository. Then what you would do is create, for example, virtual environment with Conda, or I'm always using the built-in tool from Python, and then create a virtual environment. Already have done that as well. Let's activate that. Cool, and then you would pip install all the requirements, because there are quite some. Oops. Requirements.txt. Yes, you can see I came prepared, and yeah, don't have to download everything. Cool. Let's open up the directory or the bricks with Visual Studio Code. I'm using Visual Studio Code. You can use other IDEs, of course, as well, or code editors. I think it's a little bit small, right?
Yes.
It's hard to see. Maybe I can enlarge it a little bit. I hope. tab size. Is that better? No. I think it is just increases the size of the code, right?
Yeah. It's only font size. I think.
Font size, where you have that?
Yeah, it's only increasing the font size.
Yeah, it's only increasing the font size.
Maybe it's just the screen, I guess.
I don't know. Okay, I'll guess I'll just explain what you can see here. So just like you have on the front end side, the three categories of classifiers, extractors, and generators, you have basically the same structure in the code, the underlying code. So you have one folder containing all the classifiers, and you have one folder containing all the extractors and one folder for the generators. And in each of these folders, we group bricks by a logical structure. So for example, if we have multiple brick modules for sentiment classification, they would then go into a folder called sentiment, where we have like the Vader sentiment classifier we saw earlier, and another sentiment classifier that you can use, and so on. And if you want to contribute a brick module, you can either search for a directory if it's already existing and fitting to the use case that you have, or you can, of course, feel free to create a new directory and put your brick module in there then. So we want to build a brick module that is able to summarize texts. And so we have some form of input. In our case, that's an URL to a website. And we want to get, as a result, the summarized text of that website. So our brick module would fall into the category of summarization. And we already have some modules for summarization. For example, we have one module you can use to remove small talk from texts. Basically, it's trying to look at how many stop words are in a given sentence and then removes sentences that only consist out of stop words. We have another brick module for just summarizing normal texts. And now I want to build a brick module to summarize websites. Like in every good cooking show, I also came prepared. So I prepared something. We already have the init.py file to some degree at least, which will run the code that is hosted on our endpoint. You can see the actual function is still missing. We're going to build that together later on, and I'm going to explain what we need this for. Then we have the code snippet, which also requires a little bit of a certain structure. Here again, the actual function code is still missing. Going to build that too together. Then the config and the README is also still empty, and we're going to fill that with live as well. So maybe let's start with the init.py file. What's important about this file is that you need to ensure that the input that the function receives is in a certain format. And for that, we're using a library called Pydantic. If you don't know what Pydantic is, maybe you do. I think we also had some sessions at PyCon about Pydantic. It's a library in a nutshell to ensure that the format of the input that we receive, for example, for a web service, is in a certain format. And that's all we do here, really. We import the base model function, the base model class from Pydantic, and then pass that to a specific function for our brick module. In our case, that is called the Sumi website summarizer model. And here we lay out the whole expected input. So we, of course, expect a URL. It should be a string. We can set the language of the text that we want to summarize. In our case, we have defaulted that to English, but you can also then use it to summarize like German texts or whatever other languages the Sumi library supports. And we also have a parameter for the sentence count. Basically, that's the length of the summary. So if I set this to 5, then we have 5 sentences in our summary. If I set this to 10, it will be a little bit longer. Right. And then we pass that Sumi website summarizer model into our actual function. And here we can then retrieve the information from that class. So I'm going to do that. We also need to include some doc strings before we get to coding. So yeah, thank you GitHub Copilot. This is just a short summary that will then be displayed in the actual website here under the name of the function, so that we have a very short description of what the module is able to do. Cool. And then after that, we first set up a parser, because the difference with this summarization model and the other ones is that we first want to scrape data from the internet, like Wikipedia or a blog article. Luckily, Sumi has a built-in function for that, so that we can just parse HTML from a URL. We put in a tokenizer, which will then pre-process a little bit the scraped data. After that, we're also going to use something called a stemmer. If you don't know what a stemmer is, a stemmer returns a word, like for example, doing, to its base form. So doing would then be converted into the word do. And the stemmer tries to do this for all the words so that we don't have like duplicates, because doing and do would otherwise be counted as two words, but we want to treat it as one word. That's what the stemmer in a nutshell is doing. Then we actually instantiate our summarizer, pass the stemmer to our summarizer. And we also remove stop words, because how Sumi is working under the hood, it's also counting how many stop words, for example, are there. It's a little bit more than that, but it's not super complicated. But we also need to remove the stop words of the language that we want to summarize. Yeah, then the summarizer gets our document. And after that, I think we need to do some list comprehension, because I think this is not completely right. Yeah, this should be right, because the summary is then a list of tuples which contain the extracted sentences, and we need to put that together so that we can get a normal text as an output. Okay, that's really it. That's the whole code we need for our brick module to be able to run in the on the example input side. It's only 29 lines of code, so very easy here. No rocket science needed. Oops. I'm going to try out. Yeah, you have a question?
Sumi is something that belongs to bricks, or is a third-party library?
It's a third-party library. Oh yeah, maybe I should have spoken in more detail about that. Yeah, it's a library you can find on GitHub. We can take a look at the library. I think I have posted the link here as well.
So on the Discord channel, actually, there is a room for where this tutorial is happening, and there I am also updating the links which are mentioned in the talk. So on the Discord channel.
Yeah, you can, for example, find it on the Discord, or just Google Sumi, then you can go to the page on GitHub. It's quite popular, so it has a lot of stars, and it's very lightweight again. And yeah, it's not something from Bricks itself, so it's just a third-party open source library we're also using, in this case, for our brick module as well. We could have built this ourselves, but yeah.
It was more a basic question in the sense that if someone else uses this,
Mm-hmm.
it has to install Sumi first.
Yes, they have to install Sumi first, yes.
By installing bricks, it will not automatically install Sumi.
It will if you clone our repository and then do a pip install requirements. It will then, because we will add Sumi then also to the requirements of bricks, and then you should be able to run all brick modules. So yeah.
Maybe you can show it in your requirements file.
It's not there yet because we haven't implemented it yet. But yeah, we have a file called requirements.
Yeah, here I think.
TXT.
Yeah.
Here are all the requirements needed for bricks, and if we want to add then the new brick module using Sumi, we would then add, I don't know, Sumi 0.9, and then save that and then commit that as well. So yeah, but good question. Okay, we now have the init.py ready. We're going to test it out later on as well. Or we can test it out now. Before we then finish up with the code snippet. Because we use Pydantic to check the input, we can't just hit run and run the script to see if it's working. What we need to do is we need to kind of simulate this and kind of treat it like it's already running in the actual endpoint, because yeah, this is not then executed locally, but in a remote web service. And to do that, we're using Fast API. And you can simply spin everything up. Again, Fast API should also be already installed if you install all the requirements, and you can spin up that service by running uvicorn API and do a reload, so that if we make changes, it will then restart the service. And then if we go to localhost 8000 docs, we then have a graphical user interface. This is, again, nothing from Bricks itself. This is provided by Fast API, so the service we use to then access the components, and then we can search for Sumi. It's not here because we also need to add the name of the function into another init file. So each of the generator, the classifier, and the extractors, they also have an init file. And here we need to first import that component so that Fast API is able to find that. That's why we also need to name it init.py so that it gets recognized as a name package. And here we also have the other sentiment summarization modules. Just going to add that here. And now Fast API should restart. And then we should be able to test it out. And hopefully it directly works. Okay, let's go back to Fast API, search for, maybe reload the page. Okay, it's not here, that's, okay, forgot something. All right, let's retry again. Fast API should be restarting. Application startup complete. Let's load again. Cool, and here it is. So we're now able to use the code we just wrote via an API. And thankfully, Fast API is really great to use, and we have the ability to try it out. Here we already have the schema that we have supplied. So earlier in the code, we have provided like the schema here, and this is what we can then see here. Now let's grab our link to the Capybara page and see if it's actually working. Fingers crossed, if not, that's also fine. Yeah, and it's actually working. So we have set the sentence count to 5. So our module has now summarized the whole Wikipedia page for capybaras, which is quite long, into just 5 sentences. We can go over it, okay, they have some different names in other countries. We have some sources here which are probably not that necessary for our summarization, but yeah, and it was also super quick. I mean, I can try to run it again, and it probably just takes like a second or so. So it's a really easy and lightweight solution to summarize your texts. Yeah, I mean, GPT would be probably a lot better, but also more expensive, and you can't run it on your local machine. So that's great. That's then the part for the endpoint service. We can close Fast API here again. That is all fine, that's working. Let's maybe spend some time in the code snippet file that the user will then be actually able to execute. I have prepared some of the code here already in the Markdown file, and because we can't develop in the Markdown file, maybe we need to change it in the future. But yeah, ideally you can test it out in a Jupyter notebook or a normal Python script, whatever you feel comfortable developing in. I'm going to use a Jupyter Notebook for this today. And really the difference is that we don't need to use the Pydantic base model. We also have the import statements here. And also, again, the function in the code snippet is expecting a different input than the function in the init file. So here we need to set all the parameters. We also ask every contributor to include some typing so that you know what data type is expected for the inputs, and that you should also type the output. So in this case, everything is a string. No, the sentence count should be an integer. Cool. And ideally, you should also provide some documentation. You can simply say what the params are doing. So the URL is the URL of the website you want to have summarized. Then we need to set the language, of course, sentence count. Nothing crazy here. And yeah, then we basically do the same thing we did as with our init file. For the endpoint, we instantiate the parser to scrape the data from the website. Oops. Then set up the stemmer to then return words to their base form. Summarize everything. I'm happy that I have GitHub Copilot. I don't need to do anything really. Yeah, extract the stop words. Create the summary of our text. And after that, do some joining and some list comprehension. And that's our brick module. What we also always ask users to provide in the code snippet is an example implementation. And we quite clearly divide both, so the actual implementation in code and some example integration. If you want to use this brick module, you don't really need the example integration, but it's really great to provide that for every brick so that the users can directly see, okay, what is an example? How can the inputs for that function look like so that you can directly use it? So if we then execute this, okay, took about 2.3 seconds, so not too bad. And then, yeah, you have basically the same output as you had in the Fast API dashboard, so the summarized text here. Nothing crazy, it's a little bit weirdly formatted. But yeah, we have that working as well. Then we can simply copy all of it. Cool. Paste it into the code snippet so that the users will then be able to see it on the Bricks website. And that's almost all there is to it. Then we need to configure some configuration. For that, I'm just going to the template folder that we have here as well and grab some of the code. You don't need all of it. Implement that as well here. So what configuration do we need to provide for our brick module? Of course, we need the name. So the name is Sumi Website Summarizer. Oops. Put that in here. We then also have a field for the issue ID. We need that so that on Bricks itself, we can get a link to the GitHub page. So this is then what you will see up here. If you press the button, it will basically direct you to the issue page. And we have already created one for our brick module that we are working on. It's the number 284. 284. Then you can also set like an icon, but that's not too important here at the moment as well. Some minimum required version for our other tools, also not too important. The type is probably a little bit more important, because if you're using some form of API that you need to pay for, we need to set this as a premium brick. So we let the users know that if you need to pay for a service that is running in the background, then you can see that it is a premium model, but we are not using anything like this in our case, so you can just leave it as a normal Python function. Also flag for GDPR compliance. I would say it's also totally fine. And yeah, that's really all we need to configure. And then for the README, we can also write a short description like this brick module is using the Sumi library from GitHub to summarize texts that were scraped from websites like Wikipedia or blog articles. Oops. Blog articles. Okay, then we might also include the link to the third-party library that we use so that people can jump into some documentation there if they like. Cool. Save everything, and that's basically it. You would then, of course, do your git add and git commit. Edit module for summarizing websites. Push that, oops. And I'm going to create a new branch. You probably then would have to fork it, but it's very similar then. Okay, yeah, then you can open up a pull request. Say, okay, I have built this really cool module to, oh, this is not my library, oops. Yeah, open up a new pull request for the PyCon branch I have created, and then ask some of my coworkers, for example, to look over it. Then it gets joined, and then you can already use it on our Brick service. Yeah, that's really it. And we now have a cool new Brick module. All right. Thank you, I guess. If you have any questions, then feel free to ask. You can also come to me after the session if you like. And yeah, thank you for your attention. And I hope you enjoyed it.
We can do the questions. I mean, there will be hands-on session after this, right? Or we're done with the hands-on session too?
Yeah, that's...
Oh, wow. Are there questions?
I was a little bit fast, I think, sorry.
Okay, we have a lot of time for the discussions, almost
Yeah, feel free, bombard me.
So, are there any questions anyone wants to start?
Okay.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah. Yeah, great.
Well, I would like to ask you if you could come back to the moment where you added the fast API
Yes.
line in the Swagger.
Yes.
Because it was kind of magic, okay, in 3 seconds the thing was there.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I think I rushed through a little bit. So where did I miss you? When I started up the fast API service? Or?
So you create the code, you have
Yes.
the functions there, and now you use the, you put the API up with Ubicorn.
Yes.
But fast API was kind of nowhere, but still it was the backing up the whole thing, I guess.
Yes, sure. So yeah, you're completely right. We have put all the code here in the init.py file, and then we start up fast API with the uvicorn command. So if we type in uvicorn API, again, we don't need to set up anything else. All the rest is handled by Bricks. We have already set up everything in the tool itself. And then we just need to start fast API with this command. This will spin up everything that we have. We don't need to do anything more, really. It's downloading everything that it needs, setting up everything that it needs. All of that is handled by Bricks. And now we have that running locally on our computer just to test it out. But in theory, that is exactly the same thing that would then happen on a server in the cloud to then execute all the code for the actual website Bricks. Okay, is that a little bit more clear or?
Yeah.
Okay. And after we have started then fast API, we can go to localhost 8000/docs, where we then have a graphical user interface where we can test out everything. So this is basically like one layer below the actual Bricks website, you can maybe say. So what we can test out here on the Fast API, that is basically the same thing that we're pushing like into the example input here, and the same thing we would get as an endpoint response here. So this is like just a layer on top of everything. But because we don't want to like clone the front end and everything as well, we use Fast API for this. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. Maybe it's me being dense. How do I actually use a brick in practice?
Yeah, sure. So what you can do is you can call the endpoint directly. So you can like call the URL of the actual brick. Or what you can do is you can simply copy the code snippet that you have here. So if you say, this is actually a functionality that I would like to implement in my own project, you can simply copy the code, implement it in your project, and then use it right away. So these are the two options you have.
But isn't it also part of refinery? And so you haven't mentioned refinery, I think, at all, but...
Yes, because, yeah, please, sorry.
So thank you very much. I know that you also have this product refinery where you basically can enhance your data and stuff. And I think the idea, or at least I thought that the idea of bricks is also a little bit enhancing this with having modular systems and stuff.
It is, yeah. It's kind of both. So all the bricks we have, you can use them in refinery as well. So refinery is another tool of Kern that you can use to label your data, to transform data you have, and you can use all of the brick modules that we have in our other tools as well. But you don't need to. So if you just have some normal NLP project and you would just like to go hunting for some cool code snippets, that's also totally fine. So you don't need to use these brick modules in our other products, but you of course always have the possibility to do so, yeah. So it's kind of for both. Cool.
Can you explain the AVCon? Is it also part of the bricks itself? It's just loading the Fast API, right? It's only the deployment of the API.
Yeah, exactly. So here on the live website, we have a web service, a server running, and that server has Fast API loaded in. All the endpoints are ready to go. And whenever you call an endpoint, it just executes the code that we have written and then provides you with the output.
And if people wants to do hands-on, can they start? Is there any a link which you could post so that they can start working on specially?
Yes. So everything I basically told you, you have also on our GitHub repository. We have a lot of videos on our YouTube channel where you can check that out as well. We have a file called contributing.md in our GitHub repository as well, where you have a long and detailed description of all the steps you need to take to contribute, where all of the files are then also explained, and where you can then do this yourself then too. Yes. So everything you need is already in our repository, and yeah, no one can stop you from building a brick then.
Can you pip install bricks? Like pip install bricks and then...
Not yet.
Okay.
But we will definitely implement that in the future, so that you can simply pip install bricks and then have everything ready to go.
So I would be able to use like 10 bricks, like struct address, struct numbers, struct
Yes, and
dates.
you will then you will then be able to also import a brick as a class. So for example, like here the summarization brick, you could then import like a normal class, like pip install bricks, and then from bricks import summarizer.
Website, whatever. Yeah.
Yes, but it's work in progress, but something that will come in the future. Cool.
Sorry, I mean, you were saying we can run it using a URL, but if I look at the brick for cosine similarity in the list of bricks, there's no indication how to call that using an API.
Yes, so what you would need to do is, we don't have it written out in the documentation, so, but what you can do is you can call the content management system that we have set up for bricks, and then basically say, okay, I want a classifier, and then the name of the brick, so for example, Veda sentiment classifier, and then include the data in the URL here as well. But yeah, I didn't prepare that because that wasn't a really part of the session, but it's definitely possible. But that being said, it's also just meant for playing around, but we are thinking about setting this up for production workloads in the future as well, so that you can also pass a lot of data through that as well. Yeah.
So, is it in production? Like, are there any examples for the production use case?
Yeah, so as I previously mentioned, we also use these bricks in other tools of us, like our main tool, which is called Kernel AI Refinery. And yeah, a lot of our customers are using these brick modules to then process data, transform data, enrich data. And yeah, so far we have found them very, very useful.
And when do you plan to make it as an Python, like a package? If
Can't really say at the moment. As soon as possible, definitely. But yeah,
so
needs some more time.
So you are one of the co-developer of the...
Yes, I'm one of the developers for bricks. I'm mainly spending my time working on this.
Okay. And is it how do people start contributing? Is it easier, or do you have like a much layer, or is it only exclusively for your own company people to...
No, everyone is open to contribute. It's basically everything I just showed you. That's it, to contribute a brick module. And you don't even have to contribute a whole module. What you can also do is you can go to our GitHub page and then simply open an issue. So if you have an idea for a new module, but you're maybe not really sure if it's a good idea or if it can be really useful, just share your idea on our GitHub page, and then we can maybe take a look at it. Or maybe you have some implementation, but you need feedback on to really make it work, and you can post that here as well. So you don't even need to contribute whole modules. We are happy for everything.
Are there any more questions? Or
when you use the brick with Spacey, do you do something else than classifying span text and labeling the span text? Is there any other use case or way to use Spacey?
Yeah, there are a lot of use cases for Spacey as well, which could probably fill a whole session on its own. But really, we use it to tokenize the text and then pre-process it further down the road. So that's really all of it. That's to it for us, at least. Yeah.
But what I mean is that when you do extraction of, for instance, dates in text,
yes,
when you use Spacey, you create a document where the dates are labeled, I guess.
And you can label them with Spacey, but the way we use it is we have like, imagine you have a sentence, and then when we tokenize it with Spacey, you have like a list where every word is like a part of this list. And you have kind of like an index for that then. And so we can use the output of the extraction modules, for example here, to find out the position of the extracted dates in this example. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I like the mic.
Okay.
anything else? More? Okay. So if not, I think we can end the session.
Cool. Thank you very much.
We would like to thank the speaker again, Leonard.
Thank you.
Where would you put your Notion link?
I can add it to our GitHub page if you want. Apart from that, everything you need to know like the requirements, the steps to contribute, they are already on GitHub, so you will find everything else there.
So.
And I can also share it on the Discord side of PyCon if you like.
Yeah, in the PyCon there is a channel for the room, and there I posted some links, and you can also put the the Notion link so that they can have access.
Yeah, sure, I will post everything there then as well.
So I think that ends the tutorial session. It was quite fast and quite cool. And so I think there's going to be a closing session at the Kuppensal, so please do attend it. And yeah, thank you for attending.
Yeah. Have a nice day.
Ciao,
Bye-bye.
ciao.